Whatever you do, man, just don't become this guy. Welcome back to Levitybooks. My name is Liam, and I hope you're reading well. So this might be the best book that I've read all year, Rabbit Run by John Updike. And I need a lot of time to explain why I really like this book, because this is not a nice book, and this is not a popular book either. I have an extremely positive recommendation at the end of the video, so stick around. So let me tell you the beginning of this story. Rabbit Run by John Updike is the story of a young man, Harry Rabbit Angstrom. He's 26, he's married, he's handsomely tall and can play basketball, but that's about it. What he does is he is a vegetable peeler demonstrator at a local diner store, which quite frankly sounds like the worst job possible. And he's married to an alcoholic wife, and he has a young son with her. And basically, Harry wakes up one day and says, this is not the life I want to live. And he just bolts. Just without warning, he leaves his family like a trapped animal would. So in short, Rabbit Run is a story about a man leaving his family. And everything I've just told you comprises only 1/10 of the novel, about this much. So the rest is all the aftermath, the consequences of what has happened. And it just keeps getting deeper and deeper. It's a story that keeps twisting and turning, and I found it fascinating. It really grew on me. Okay, so listen really closely. This is the most important thing that I'm going to say in this entire video. If you start Rabbit Run, please be patient with it. The first 40 pages or so are tough to get through because Rabbit is obnoxious, he's not that interesting, and the story doesn't seem like it's really going anywhere. But please trust me, John Updike does this on purpose, and it becomes more apparent why this is the case later in the story. It just creates this perfect plot transition that just works so well. It's very gradual, but there's a reason that the story is just quite flat at first, so really do persist with it. When I got to page 36, I put as my Goodreads status, like, I'm just going to give up on this. But I read some reviews, people said, keep up with it, so I did. And I'm really glad I did, because I really did enjoy it. But 30 pages in, yeah, I thought this was nothing special, and I thought I was going to leave it because I just really didn't like Rabbit as the main character. So for Rabbit Run, you should see it like you do Patrick Bateman in American Psycho or Walter White in Breaking Bad. It's slow, but it's slow at the beginning on purpose so that you can see this character truly transform. Except here, Rabbit isn't becoming some criminal drug lord or serial killer. He's just becoming a womanizer, which is in a way more terrifying because it's a monster which isn't prosecuted by law, and it's a reality too many of us have witnessed in the real world. So this brings me on to my next point. Why did I find a book about this so amazing? The truth is, nobody writes stories like Rabbit Run anymore. Husbands nowadays leave their wives, maybe now more than ever, for reasons which we aren't too sure. We're often wondering, why did this happen? And this is a story which gets behind that mindset of a man who is afraid of commitment. If a man wrote a story like this today, it would not win the awards that John Updike did. And most authors and readers are women, and most women don't want to read about men who are unremarkably terrible, and I don't blame them. But I think stories like Rabbit Run will always be profoundly important to men. Because Rabbit Run warns men against leaving their families. It is a guide on how not to be a man. You don't want to be like Rabbit. Rabbit Run is an imaginative exercise in wondering whatever happened to that jock who became a father too early in life. It's a story about not peaking too early. And some people seem to rush to try to settle down their families. And I think what John Updike is saying here is a metaphor, the hare and the tortoise. Harry the rabbit here is the hare, except the rest that he is taking, he is not taking alone. So Rabbit Run is a story that advises young men not to peak too early, to become a rock before providing support to someone else, and not to get hung up on their reputation in youth as some big shot. So this was written in the late 50s, early 60s, and John Updike said that he saw it as an antithesis to Jack Kerouac's On the Road. In his own words, which he puts in the afterword to my edition, he says, "Without reading it, I resented On the Road's apparent instruction to cut loose." Rabbit Run was meant to be a realistic demonstration of what happens when an American family man goes on the road. And to find out what Updike thinks will happen to a man who leaves his family, you'll just have to read Rabbit Run. And honestly, I could only read this in like 20-page intervals, like that much, maybe less a night, because I found it really psychically draining. It felt like I was physically condoning Rabbit's actions, like I was abandoning some fictional family. And it was just really psychically draining. I had to like process it. I had to read a small part each day. I felt like in moving with Rabbit's story, I was part of this destruction he was creating. Though despite all this, somehow Updike makes it enjoyable enough to read. There are times where Rabbit seems like a normal person. I found this book profoundly formative for, I think it would be great for young male readers, because it just shows you how not to be. This is a lesson in how not to be. Like, don't become this. This is the person you don't want to become. And kind of ironically, as a reader, you don't have to commit to this series. There are 4 other books in the series, and each one chronicles the next decade of Rabbit's life. But when John Updike wrote this book, he only intended this as a standalone. And I think it ends somewhere quite conveniently. So if you're not too taken with it, you can just stop here. But I feel compelled to read another, but I'm going to take a break because it will just be too much at once. And Rabbit Run was written when John Updike was 27, and it was meant to capture that decade of his life. And Rabbit acts as this persona, if you will, of just an asshole, really, just someone who fails to commit to family, someone who reads on the road and fully commits to it despite already being someone with responsibilities. Although it goes deeper than Rabbit just being an asshole, because he clearly doesn't understand some basic things about expressing your feelings or how consent works. So, trigger warning, there are some pretty uncomfortable sex scenes in this book, but they are as uncomfortable as they are well written. They are clearly getting every moment of tension, which is unpleasant, but it's really showing how this plays out. John Updike says he wanted to give a realistic depiction of someone who is like this. So I think there are a few other reasons that Rabbit Run has quite a low rating on Goodreads. One is mainly that people don't like reading about characters who are unpleasant and unfavorable. They feel like they're supporting these characters. So if you feel like you can't read a story about a bad man, then this definitely isn't a book for you. Another reason Rabbit Run is not highly rated on Goodreads is because he is one of the typical white male authors, and I can't put this better than David Foster Wallace did in his 1997 Observer essay, which is a negative review of one of Updike's later works, but I'm going to paraphrase the main parts that will make sense to why I think John Updike's reputation is not great. So, to paraphrase David Foster Wallace, Mailer, Updike, Roth, the great male narcissists who've dominated post-war realist fiction, are now in their senescence. Updike's big preoccupations have always been with death and sex, and he has always written largely about himself, at least in the total 25 Updike books I've read. I've continued to read Mr. Updike's novels and to admire the sheer gorgeousness of his descriptive prose. I'd like to offer assurances that your reviewer is not one of these spleen-venting, spittle-splattering Updike haters one encounters among literary readers under 40. The fact is, I am probably classifiable as one of very few actual sub-40 Updike fans. Most of the literary readers I know personally are under 40, and a fair number are female, and none of them are big admirers of the post-war great male narcissists, but it's Mr. Updike in particular they seem to hate, and not merely his books. For some reason, mention the poor man himself and you have to jump back. The quotes are on the screen. These are actual, trust me, quotations, and I've heard even worse ones, and they're usually accompanied by the sort of facial expression where you can tell there's not going to be any profit in arguing or talking about the aesthetic pleasure of Mr. Updike's prose. The point that I'm trying to make through David Foster Wallace's essay is that female readers tend to really dislike Updike because of the fact that his topics and his characters are just generally quite unlikable. I see a lot of people box Rabbit Run into class, race, gender distinctions in America in the 1950s, and that makes sense because of how it's written, but I really don't think it has to be seen that way always. Last time I checked, things like Rabbit happen worldwide. Divorces happen worldwide. You don't need to be like Rabbit to learn from him, and there are rabbits out there everywhere. You could switch out basketball, the Maggie Peel peeler, the diner for cultural equivalents, and the story would be as relevant anywhere as it is in America in the 50s. You can still find men who do and say terrible things today, like Rabbit, just culturally updated. They'll be using new words for the same feelings. But what matters to us, to me, to you, is that this book is the realest and truest representation of the mindset of that man. A man afraid of commitment, a man afraid of responsibility, or afraid of expressing his feelings, all these things that are normally, I guess, what you might call soft male traits, or just generally being a good guy. They're just so absent here, and it's done in such a realistic way that this is a book for good. It's a demonstration of how to be bad, but when everyone sees it, when you call these things out into the open, they can be discussed and understood and recognized and changed. I think this is a lesson for all of us, and if we could only listen to Rabbit's impulses, there'll be fewer men like this in the world. So in conclusion, I'd strongly recommend Rabbit Run to basically all men in their 20s and 30s. It really surprised me. By the end, I was just blown away by it. It was so good. So with that, happy reading.